Welcome to the Worldwide Doula podcast. I'm Barry, I'm a registered nurse and birth doula, and each week I'm joined by a new guest speaker to talk about all things pregnancy, birth, babies, and parenthood. So it's time to sit back and relax as we get into some juicy topics. Hey everyone, welcome back to season 2 of the Worldwide Doula podcast. Today I'm joined by naturopath and nutritionist Shelley. Shelley is a nutritionist and naturopath specialising in pregnancy and nutrition, and she is based in Port Melbourne with her husband, 3 beautiful children, and her dog Kevin, which I love. I love the name Kevin.
It's good, isn't it?
Yeah, welcome to the podcast, Shelley. How are you going?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me. It is awesome to jump on a call to chat to you and dive into all things pregnancy.
Yes, I'm super excited for this episode. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So, I'm Melbourne based. I originally grew up in the country, about 3 hours from Melbourne, and I guess I lived the typical. I grew up in a family which was you meat and 3 veg kind of situation. When I moved to Melbourne at the ripe age of 18, I really indulged in the lifestyle, I guess. Lots of partying and, just eating out and, just not treating my body all that well. And funnily enough, I was a personal trainer at the time. So I kind of explain it as Monday to Friday, I was living this lifestyle where I thought I was eating well for myself and I was training lots, but come the weekend from Friday to Sunday, I was binge eating. I was doing the 3 a.m. Macca's run. I was not sleeping and I was just backing it up day to day, right? And so when I hit 24, I became really unwell and it was very sudden. I remember I was heading back to my parents' house in the country and I pulled over on the side of the road and I just felt so ill. I didn't know how I was going to continue the drive. I was about halfway there. Anyway, I got to their house and I just declined. My health just kept going further and further down. My parents were obviously really worried. And from there, we went to specialists, doctors, you name it. And after 4 weeks, I was diagnosed with a condition called Hashimoto's, which I believe at the time wasn't all that common or wasn't widely spoken about. Like now I feel like a lot of people have a really, not a good understanding, but have a knowledge of what Hashimoto's is. It's a thyroid disorder. However, I was 24, so that was over, it was like 12 years ago. Longer, 13. And so it was quite a while ago. And we went through all these tests trying to figure out what was wrong with me. Like I got so ill that I couldn't even walk from the couch to the toilet. Like I had to be physically carried because I just had no energy. I ended up being on 24-hour care. So either my parents and my now husband, but boyfriend at the time, ended up coming up and they were all like, someone had to watch me for 24 hours till we discovered what was actually wrong. We were heading to, by we, me and my now husband were heading to India at the time. And we were a couple of weeks out from our trip and we were going to be riding a motorbike down the coastline of India. And we were gone for 6 weeks. And the doctors kept saying, no, you're crazy, you can't go. And I remember being given a bag of pills and take this with you. You're going to need to take one of these pills every day for the rest of your life. And I truly believe there is a time and a place for Western medicine, but I knew within myself the lifestyle that I had been living, I had not been looking after myself in any way, shape or form. And so I just knew that there was a lot of change I could make. And so I then went down this rabbit hole of research. And when we went to India, there were days where I was certainly still really fatigued and sick, but we'd just stop and we had no plans. We had the flexibility. But when I was over there, I went onto a vegan diet, utilizing a lot of the beautiful herbs and spices within the culture, and I felt better. But then I got to 6 months being vegan and obviously I was starting to become really depleted because I was kind of just winging how to be a vegan-based diet. And so I started becoming really depleted in things like my iron, my B12. So from there I went paleo and then from there I went keto and then I went into the bodybuilding world. Like it was wild. I just kind of jumped around trying to figure out what was right. And this all led me to studying nutrition. And I still never have been on medication and we're 13 years on. And even though I jumped around trying to heal myself, I managed to. So I still to this day control my Hashimoto's through diet and lifestyle. I know all my triggers. I know what to look for and how to obviously treat myself. And I wanted to share this with everyone else. And I didn't just want it to be my personal experience. I wanted to really get to know the science and, all of that. So I studied nutritional medicine and then went on to study naturopathy, had 3 babies, and here we are. Now I'm specializing in pregnancy nutrition.
That's amazing. That amazing story. And you mentioned to me a little bit before that you had miscarriages.
Yes. So that's what threw me into, I guess, this space of pregnancy nutrition was prior to having my own babies. So my eldest is almost 5. I hadn't really specialized in anything yet. And I had been told from the age of 24 that when you're ready to conceive, you're probably going to find it really hard because of your Hashimoto's. And yes, this is correct. Unmanaged Hashimoto's can cause miscarriage. So you can fall pregnant, but you can have miscarriages. And so when my husband and I were finally ready to try I had a miscarriage at 13 weeks. And I just at that point again, was told it's your body's way of taking care of something that's not quite right. And I truly believe that. But by this point, I had already studied my nutritional degree and I just knew that there was something more I could do to prepare my body for a healthy pregnancy. Like I just knew that. Yeah. And I remember at the time thinking, oh, here we go. Here's that fertility. We're going to be on this journey that we've been warned about for all this time. So after that miscarriage, I really, again, made it my mission to figure out what I needed to do in order to have a healthy pregnancy. And a lot of that was diving into blood pathology. So looking at my progesterone levels, for example, which are needed to successfully carry a pregnancy. I needed to look at my estrogen levels to make sure I was ovulating. I wanted to look at my nutrient levels. Like more and more research is coming out that if you're iron deficient or vitamin D deficient, which a lot of the Australian population are, then that can also contribute to miscarriage. So it was all about, again, in the Western world, you're told 3 miscarriages and then we'll start investigating. But it was traumatic. Like I didn't want to go through that 3 times to then start investigations. And so that's a big part of what I do now. And I actually spoke about it on my stories just last week on Instagram about what to look for in the case of miscarriage and what further tests you can do to take the proactive approach to your fertility and next pregnancy. So that really led me into now specializing in pregnancy care mostly, but also obviously preconception and postpartum as well.
Yeah, I definitely resonate with you about getting out of like a small town and then being in a big city and just like stuffing your face with all the things that you're not supposed to be eating. It's like the story of pretty much everyone's life. Like my mum was super healthy when I was growing up. My lunchbox was like, super healthy stuff. My mum was always feeding us salads and everything. So when I left home, I was like, great, cool, let's do this. I get to eat sugar and, all this stuff. So yeah, it's the story.
Do.
Yeah. And then it hits you and you're like, what am I doing?
Yeah,
definitely.
Exactly.
So let's get into it. Why is nutrition so important during pregnancy and also after?
Yeah. So pregnancy nutrition, preconception care, pregnancy nutrition, it is preventative care essentially. So again, more and more research is starting to come out about how our maternal nutrition can lead to the nutrient status of baby as well, and what that can do for baby long term in terms of their mental health and their learning ability and all of that kind of stuff. So I like to look at the pregnancy nutrition in 2 ways. One, it is a way to nourish your baby. Like at the end of the day, I always say Mother Nature is always going to prioritize your baby. Your baby will always get what it needs. And obviously for the development of a healthy baby, not only while in utero, but for its future is really important. However, the other side of that is because Mother Nature is always prioritizing baby, we also need to make sure that mum is okay, because once you have your baby, I want you to be able to show up. Again, there's this common misconception that just because you're a mum, you should feel tired and you should feel this and that. And I just don't believe it. And I had 3 babies under 3. And I honestly, of course, there was times where I felt flatlined, but for the most part, like mentally and physically, I felt really good. And so I know how important nutrition is, particularly in pregnancy for mama as well. And again, if we think about, which we're going to dive into each trimester and things, but we know that if mama is depleted in iron, which is super common, like almost every pregnant woman is depleted in iron, but then that plays into her fourth trimester. And as women, we never know what that period is going to look like for us from baby to baby. And if you're depleted in iron, for example, that increases your risk of postnatal anxiety and depression. And so we really want to look at your nutrient status in pregnancy so that, yes, you can have the best outcome for baby, but also for you. It's going to help your recovery. It's going to help your mental health, all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of how I look at it, to support baby and baby's future, but also to support mama and how she's able to show up for her baby in that postpartum period.
Yeah, it's huge. It's huge. It has such a huge effect on everything. Yeah. In one of my previous episodes, I actually speak to like another nutritionist. And yeah, she said that what we eat when we're pregnant or even before we start trying to conceive affects our eggs, which then affects our children later on and development and everything. So yeah, it's so crucial.
It's wild. Yeah.
In the first trimester, it's most commonly known for symptoms like morning sickness and hormonal breakouts and fatigue. Any tips for managing these kind of symptoms with your diet?
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk morning sickness first. I think the most important thing is to work out what's contributing to your nausea. So is it hypoglycemia, which is essentially your symptoms would be when your nausea feels worse with delayed meals. So say you've gone from breakfast to lunch and you haven't eaten in a space of 5 hours, like is that nausea worse because of that long distance between meals? And therefore, if it's hypoglycemia, it's going to be relieved by eating. You will also have stronger cravings towards carbohydrates and sugars. So if hypoglycemia is the main cause of your morning sickness, then eating frequently is essential. So every 2 to 3 hours, and structuring your meals as well, no matter what, but having your carbohydrates first. Like in that first trimester, your eating habits are most likely going to change, and they're going to probably be very carb heavy, and that's okay. But if you can focus your meals so you focus on that carbohydrate component first. So for example, if all you want's toast, eat the toast with Vegemite, but then try to follow up with protein and fat. So then you might have an egg afterwards once that nausea is kind of calmed down, because often having the carb first will calm it. The other thing that can contribute to nausea is slow digestive function. So again, really common, that constipation picture. So if you're experiencing a poor appetite and you're just feeling like you're never hungry, if your nausea is made worse from eating, or if you're experiencing fullness really quick, getting reflux and obviously constipation as well, then that's probably that slow digestive function, in which we need to work on that side of things. So eating it every 2 to 3 hours may not be your answer, but instead focusing on, you know, your 2 kiwi fruits with the skin on during the day. The skin on is where all the fiber and good stuff is. So that's really good for constipation, making sure you're hitting your water intake for the day, even if you've got to add an electrolyte or something to it, you know, some lemon, berries, flavor your water, because a lot of women go off water in that first trimester as well.
That's so interesting.
Yeah. Some women can't get enough, and some women get to the point, like they'll drink it and they get to the point they're like, oh, I just feel like my body's kind of flooded and I just can't do the taste of water. So that's where we can flavor it, just to try to get that in there. So figuring out which one's contributing to your nausea is definitely going to help which way you go ahead. But yeah, as I said, like sequencing your meal, so you're eating your carbohydrates first. I always like to say you pimp up your meals. So again, if you're just craving toast for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, how can you pimp that up? So I always say, like, you know, if you can put some peanut butter on it and sprinkle some hemp seeds on the top, at least you get in a little bit of protein. Or, you know, again, you might do your Vegemite, but maybe you can stomach an egg on top of that as well.
Yeah.
So just try to think about ways that you can pimp up that meal. If you're doing a porridge, can you add some seeds and stuff in it? Or can you add a protein, like a pregnancy safe protein powder in there? You know, just try to think about how you can, pimp up your meals. If it's pasta, you might add some lentil pasta in as a mix, or you might switch out for the lentil pasta or add veggies to your smoothies, that kind of thing. And then the other thing that's often overmissed with your morning sickness is looking at your supplements. So a lot of women are on at least a prenatal supplement. If it's a poor quality supplement, then it will most likely be contributing to your nausea. The amount of women that come to me who are taking Elevate, for example, because it is a poor quality supplement, it's causing nausea. And sometimes it can take women a couple of months to actually figure out, like when they hit that 13, 14 weeks and their nausea hasn't passed and they're thinking, why am I still sick? And then all of a sudden they think, oh, maybe I'll stop taking my Elevate. Then that's when they go, oh, that was actually what was causing that. So looking at your supplements is really important. And I like to prioritize just your essential supplements in this first trimester. So again, a lot of women think the more supplements, the better. But if it's setting off your nausea and if you're actually getting to the point where you're struggling to function or you're vomiting, then obviously like that supplement is doing you no favors whatsoever. Yeah. So if you've managed to do some preconception care, fabulous. You're going to have nutrient stores banked up. But looking at things like your zinc and iron. So if you have a supplement with zinc and iron, they actually compete. But what you want to be doing is moving them maybe to the afternoon. So for example, if you have a prenatal without the iron, but with the zinc, move it to the afternoon or the night and see if that helps. Choose tablet form supplements over capsules because they absorb quicker in the gut. So again, it's going to help that nausea if it is those nutrients. Ginger is amazing. So a couple of ways to get ginger in.
I love my ginger.
I know, right? You can take it as like a tea, or I like to just put it in a Ziploc bag in the freezer and grate it straight into some cold water so you consume in the whole root. It kind of comes out as like Parmesan cheese consistency when you've grated it and frozen it. But then you can take a capsule if you want. I also often recommend the sugar-free ginger beer. It's amazing, like the bubbles as well. There's something to it and it can be really beautiful. And B6 is great as well. And, you know, I said before, like looking at Elevate as a poor quality supplement, funnily enough, they do the only morning sickness supplement that is B6 and ginger combined. So it can actually be a really nice supplement, the morning sickness one to take. However, the prenatal, I personally wouldn't recommend. But yeah, and then the other thing with your nausea is sleeping as well. Like the more tired you are, the more that's going to contribute. In terms of fatigue, I mean, really focusing again on that protein and the fat. Most women aren't even hitting their protein needs outside of pregnancy, let alone in pregnancy. So again, if that means having to eat your carbohydrates first, that's fine. But your fats and your proteins are going to stabilize those blood sugars for you and give you the energy. So I like to have this general rule of if your lunch meal, if that can be a lower grain-based meal, so grains are still really important to have in there, but if you've got to get through your entire day at work, and first trimester is hard because a lot of women haven't told colleagues and things, like it's survival. If your lunch meal can be really high in your good quality fats, so it might be avocado, nuts, seeds, olive oils, that kind of stuff, and a good quality protein, then that's going to really help, particularly with like the afternoon slump and things like that. Looking at your sleep that night, passion flower is a beautiful herb you can incorporate in a tea form to help with sleep onset, so going to sleep and staying asleep. So again, like, you know, if you can assist your sleep with something like passion flower or magnesium, then that's going to be a really nice way to kind of get on top of that fatigue as well. But sleep where possible. I am pro naps.
For sure. Yeah, I think that's one huge thing. You know, you're still working most of the time in first trimester. You haven't told anyone. And I mean, it's just an added benefit that now after COVID, a lot of people are still working from home. So they can take those naps and, you know, maybe catch up on work a little bit later. But yeah, just be easy on your body. You know, your body is basically like trying to figure out what's going on. The egg has been implanted and all your hormones are going crazy and all your immune systems is like, oh, what is going on? You know, so there's a lot going on in the first trimester and you just have to give yourself a break. Not be so hard on yourself. Take naps. And maybe you do have to tell your boss if you're really experiencing bad fatigue and morning sickness, it's sometimes easier.
Absolutely. At
So
least you've got
yeah.
that support. I
Yeah.
remember my first pregnancy that I miscarried, the fatigue was so full on. And I mean, not say if a woman's listening to this and she's like, oh no, I've got really bad fatigue. Like fatigue is very common in
Yeah.
pregnancy. I had it all four of my pregnancies, but I happened to miscarry the first one. And I remember I hadn't told, I was running my nutrition practice in a chiropractic clinic, and I hadn't told the boss. And one day he pulled me aside and he's like, you're just not performing. Like your
Yeah.
work ethic is horrid at the minute. You're just a downer to be around, essentially. And like to my clients, I was putting so much energy trying to show up to my clients
Yeah.
that when my client walked out the door, I'd just kind of like be like, oh, thank God. And I wasn't trying to show up for my colleagues. I didn't feel like I had to, but obviously I did. Anyway,
Yeah.
I went home that day and just cried and cried and cried. And I was like, oh my God. And I was just sleeping like around the clock. And then, yeah, I ended up miscarrying. But then I had to tell them anyway for that additional support. But, you know,
Yeah.
I wished that I had have just said to them in that moment, like, I'm actually pregnant and I'm just doing my best,
Yeah.
because I feel like he would have been a whole lot more understanding of my situation. Instead, I went home and cried, and that made me even more tired because I was expending all this energy to that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you know, even addressing things like your exercise, just go for gentle walks to keep moving. Look at that. Become the no queen. You know, if you're getting asked to do a million things, you know, in your time in terms of social activities, like don't be afraid to say no. Like
Yeah.
I'm just under the pump at the moment. I've just got to relax on my weekends. You know, whatever you've got to do, just do it, because it is really important for not only how you feel, but your mental health as well, because it gets exhausting if you're trying to show up everywhere as you
Mm.
would when you're not growing a tiny little human from scratch.
Yes,
Big deal.
definitely. Yeah. And then in the second trimester, you feel like bliss. You know, it's the
Mm-hmm.
trimester that most people feel the glow of pregnancy. They have the beautiful, luscious, long locks,
Yeah, yeah.
luscious hair. And I often hear from my mums that they have loved this trimester the most. How does your nutrition needs
Mm.
change now in the second trimester?
So second trimester calorie requirements definitely increase. I never want my clients to be tracking their
Yeah.
calories, but it is important to know that your intake is starting to increase as opposed to first trimester. Like our calorie intake and everything kind of stays the same. I don't believe in eating for two and that mindset, but we
Mm.
definitely need to be eating more. So if I was to put that into an example, like if you look at your palm of your hand, your palm is kind of what your protein needs are for first trimester, but by second trimester, you're jumping up to your knuckle. And by third trimester, you're jumping up to your whole hand for like your proteins, for example. So protein is really important for rapid growth of baby's organs and even just the expansion of your tissue as a mother as well. And with protein, often depending obviously if you're plant-based or not, but often if you're eating meat, for example, you're also getting your iron, which in second trimester, iron demands start to increase as well. And this is increased due to the tissue growth, red blood cells, and hemoglobin production. So if you're getting in the protein, you're often getting in your iron and you're getting in your collagen as well, which is really important. So those three nutrients are really big.
Mm.
Remember as well, your protein, you know, it's coming from your meat, but also even things like your eggs, seafood, yogurts and things. You can get it in a lot of your nuts and seeds. So normally by second trimester, most fooded versions are starting to go. And this
Mhm.
is a really nice time to really, again, pimp up your meals and get the most out of it. Vitamin C is also really important. So it's important for the growth and development of baby during pregnancy, but it also plays a really crucial role in the formation of collagen and helps iron absorption. So basically, if you're getting in at least 1 or 2 cups of fruit and veg each meal, you're going to be hitting your vitamin C. And then the other two nutrients, so the one I can't overlook is iodine. Baby's relying on your thyroid for the first 18 weeks of its life until it's developed its own. So your thyroid gland is essentially important for everything within your body, like every process from regulating your temperature from hot, cold to how your metabolism functions to your energy. So your iodine needs in the first and second trimester, particularly the beginning of second trimester, is really crucial. So iodine is in things like your sea vegetables. So
Mm-hmm.
I like clients to either be eating the seaweed snacks, like a few packets of them a week at least or every day. They're a really nice salty snack that a lot of women can actually tolerate really well in pregnancy. You can also get seaweed in the flake form. So, like dulce flakes, for example, at most health food stores, you can add that to your Himalayan salt and that be your cooking salt, for example.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really nice way to add your iodine into your diet. And that's really crucial, again, for baby's thyroid, but also baby's brain development and nervous system function as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then your essential fatty acids. So they're things like your salmons, olive oils, flax seeds, flaxseed oils, that kind of stuff is also really important for baby's brain and eye development. So yeah, they're kind of the main ones that we're looking for mama. But essentially, if you've got a whole food diet 80% of the time, you're going to be hitting most of these needs.
Gosh, there's so much information out there. Like the videos of like this guy eating, deciding what he's going to eat for breakfast, and he's watching his Instagram. And then there's this video, don't eat this, this is like bad for you, blah, blah, blah. And then like one is don't eat olive oil. Like I've been eating olive oil since I was really young. And obviously everything in moderation. Don't go,
Yeah.
spoonful, into your mouth. But is it good to eat? I just like
For sure.
for sure.
Instagram's really confusing. I saw that as
Yeah.
well. And it was like, don't eat eggs. And then, so he puts the eggs aside and then he
Yeah.
goes to eat oats. And it's like, don't eat oats. So then he puts the eggs aside and he's going to eat a piece of lettuce. And it was like, don't eat lettuce. And he's like, well, what the F am I meant
Yeah,
to eat? It was
what
actually
do I
really
eat?
funny. Yeah.
Exactly. You have to know what to trust.
Yeah, you really do. And I think when it comes to Instagram, I love Instagram. And I just think it's spreading so much awareness, or social media, it's spreading so much awareness. And it's such a great way to educate people, particularly. And if we're thinking about pregnancy, like a lot of the recommended advice that we're given when we first go to the GP in first trimester and we're like 4 or 5 weeks pregnant, and they give you this list of like food safety on what to not eat, for example, like it honestly rules out a lot of food. And I
Yeah.
think Instagram is a place, or social media, it really does educate people on a different way. And it helps people discover, like you and I, for example, like it helps them discover people who are qualified in the field. But I think it's really important to make sure whoever you are getting your advice from, they are a qualified practitioner
Yeah.
in that field. And once they resonate with you and you like their messaging, stick to them. Try to just unfollow or at least block out any other advice, because I just think it can become so confusing. There's all these mixed messages. And the important thing to know as well, like we all work differently. So you'd be the same, like all doulas work differently, all
Yeah.
naturopaths and nutritionists work differently. You know what I mean? And so we are still going to have similar messages, but we're going to portray that in a way that may or may not resonate with you. And so I think
Yeah.
it's just really important to have your wits about you. Don't be afraid to ask people like, oh, do you mind me asking what your qualification is? Because it's an important time. But yes, olive oil is so fine to eat. Like it's your essential fatty acid. And again, this is where if we're following too much advice, and say, for example, like a woman cut out all eggs, she cut out her olive oil, she cut out like salmon and all of that because of the mercury, which, by the way,
Yeah.
salmon's actually perfectly safe. But like, where are we getting our essential fatty acids from? Because if she's then pairing that with morning sickness, fatigue, and food aversions, you know what I mean? Like it can actually end up being not more damaging, but yeah, like I mean, essential fatty acids are important for baby's brain and eye development.
Yeah.
So we need those coming in through the diet. And so that's where, yeah, I think you've just got to have your wits about you and just know that social media is a place that can be so great and educational as long as you're following the right people, which is
Yes.
scary to think
Yeah,
about.
definitely. Definitely. Oh gosh. Something that I did want to talk to you about is the dreaded glucose tolerance test because
Mm-hmm.
I mean most women do it. There are some women who choose not to do it just because it's so disgusting, or they just don't want to put that in their body, which is totally fair. But yeah, what's your take on glucose tolerance test? And do you have any
Yep,
advice around that?
I sure do. So personally, I didn't do it for any of my three pregnancies, but I do think it is so important to screen for gestational diabetes. But again,
Mm.
we're not offered anything other than the glucose tolerance test. And interestingly enough, it's only us in the US who do this test. The
Oh,
countries have different methods, but we're following the US on this one, which I kind of think says a lot. Like, anyway, so the glucose tolerance test, what I like to do is offer the blood test first to clients. So in your ideally first trimester, and then again around that 25, 26 weeks, I'd be asking you to get your fasting blood glucose, fasting insulin, and your HbA1c done. If we've got the reading in the first trimester, it helps us look at how your body is processing insulin, and also we can predict a little bit in the first trimester as well what the likelihood or what your risk may be of forming gestational diabetes, and we can kind of alter the diet based on that and bring in some supplements as well. But they would be your three blood tests that I would request my clients who choose not to do the oral glucose test. So the oral glucose test, if you haven't heard of it, is essentially just a sugar drink. You're eating like 10 pieces of white bread in one sitting, essentially. Like that's what the sugar kind of converts to,
yum.
which, yeah, most people aren't going to just sit there and eat 10 slices of white bread. From there, if that came back, those three blood tests came back with a higher reading, then what I would get you to do is an at-home finger prick testing for a week so we can fully work out whether you actually do have gestational diabetes or whether it was, just the reading on the day or whatever you ate the night before or
Yeah.
what that might look like. Because remember as well, it's measuring insulin, right? So if you had a really high carb dinner and then some dessert the night before, and then you went and did your blood test in the next morning, then that's probably going to come back a little bit high. So
Mm.
that's where looking at your finger prick testing and your readings for the next week is really useful. Other women decide to then go on and do the oral glucose test if it comes back higher readings. But
Mm.
generally speaking, I mean, if women are also listening to this, they've probably got a pretty good grasp on their diet. And so, yeah, like, I mean, it's not, there is obviously like age, and if you're overweight, then that's obviously going to contribute as well. But a lot of it does come down to just the function of your placenta also.
Mm.
So some of it is out of your control. If you're doing the oral glucose tolerance test, though, I always say to my clients the night before, you want to be eating lots of veggies, proteins, and fats. So, that might be an animal kind of protein or a fish with heaps of steamed or roast veggies, some olive oil or a butter, and then getting a really good night's sleep. And then the day of the oral glucose tolerance test, having a substantial meal again with protein, complex carbs and fats ready to go straight afterwards. So you take that with you to go and take the next day, or like take that day off, because you're going to probably be really exhausted after consuming such a huge amount of sugar. And even in the 1 to 2 weeks prior, like just really limit your sugar and your processed carbohydrates as well, and just focus on that protein, vegetable and fat component to help balance your blood
Mm.
sugar levels if you do choose to do the test. But yeah, I've had clients that have gone and done the glucose oral test, and the poor things, they've ended up vomiting and then they've had to do it again. So again, this is where it's like some women want to do this, and that is okay. This is your pregnancy. This is just giving you more information. But that's where the three blood tests together may be your best option. They all need to be fasted, obviously. And same thing, I always recommend pregnant women, if they're doing any fasted blood tests, just to make sure you bring your breakfast so you can eat straight away.
Yeah. And then in the third trimester, obviously, you start feeling really heavy again and more tired. You're getting to the end of your pregnancy. How can your diet boost your energy in this trimester?
Yeah, so it's kind of the same thing, like focusing on your proteins and fats is really
Yeah.
important. By this point, like a lot of women are doing better on really small, consistent meals because that fullness is just so uncomfortable. So
Yeah.
even if you're having breakfast, lunch, and dinner, you might split that into two meals. So yeah, focusing on that protein and fat, and your protein increases again, as I said, we're up to like a whole hand each of your three main meals. But then also looking at your iron is essential. So by third trimester, most women's iron has plummeted. And just talking really quickly about blood pathology, we're also wanting to I recommend getting your iron tested every 4 weeks from second trimester on, just because conventionally, and you might be able to correct me here, I think it's like 26 or 28 weeks, no, even earlier, maybe 20 weeks, and then you're not getting it tested again from memory until like 32 weeks, maybe.
Yeah,
Do
I
you
think
know?
that's right.
Yeah. So it's quite a long time. And
Yeah.
because of that hemodilution and also baby's storing enough iron for the first 6 months of its life, because assuming a woman is breastfeeding, not much iron is transferred through breast milk. So baby's
Mm.
doing a lot of storing at this point. So a lot of the fatigue often comes down to iron. So looking at
Yeah.
your iron levels is essential. There's a lot you can do for iron. In terms of, obviously you've got your red meat. So if you can be getting it through dietary points of view, that's great. But then also looking at good quality iron supplements. So I wouldn't necessarily, I don't recommend over the counter, just because the amount of iron is too high for our body to be able to absorb. So if we're
Yeah.
thinking about over the counter irons, most of them have 100 milligrams of iron per serve. Our body can actually only uptake 50 milligrams of iron within a 24, 48-hour period.
And
So
then you just get really constipated, right?
exactly. So
Yeah.
yeah, so looking at a lower dose iron, such as 25 milligrams per serve, is really
Hmm.
important. And then I also often couple that with a like organ meat supplement as well, which is a little bit controversial because of the vitamin A, but it's not in the form of retinol, it's in the form of beta carotene, and we're looking at it from a whole foods point of view. And so again, important to work with your healthcare practitioner when you're looking at your iron needs and what you can be doing to boost them. But definitely looking at your iron and your vitamin D. Baby's storing a lot of vitamin D and omega-3s in this third trimester. So all three of those nutrients are really important for your own fatigue, mental health, brain clarity. So yeah, checking in on those nutrients, not that your omega-3s can be checked in on via a blood pathology
Yeah.
test, but if you're not eating a lot of fish or getting a lot of nuts and seeds and oils and things, then you potentially want to supplement. I do, however, if a woman is supplementing with omega-3s, I do take them out around 37 weeks, just because one, they're a blood thinner, but also they can inhibit prostaglandins, which we need to go into labor. So I
Yeah.
do normally pull the omegas back out of the diet at some
Hmm.
point, but you can kind of load up before that 37 weeks.
Yeah. I mean, what every woman wants to know at the end of their third trimester, how to actually go into labor, you know? What
Yeah.
are some foods that can help you go into labor? I've heard of dates and raspberry leaf tea and castor oil. Like, I mean, I feel like sometimes they're just wives' tales, and other times, it works, maybe.
Mm. Yep.
So,
So dates, there is some small research around dates. However, I don't really recommend it, because if we're talking about the sugar load again,
yeah.
I just feel like you've got to be eating 6 medjool dates a day in
Yeah.
order to actually hit that medicinal load, which converts to like 17 teaspoons of sugar or something
That's a
crazy.
lot.
It
Yeah.
is a lot. So if you're going to be doing dates, the way that I would recommend them is, like, I wouldn't get you to be hitting your medicinal dose of the 6 per day. Just eat them because you enjoy them, but make sure they're coupled with your protein and fat. So again, like I say to women, if you really want to eat dates, make them into a nice bliss ball that can also convert to a labor snack. We need that quick high sugar
Mm,
energy during
hmm.
labor. We're essentially running a marathon. So that would be the only way that I really recommend incorporating them there. But raspberry leaf tea, absolutely. It's a 2-gram dose from 37 weeks onwards. So some women will have that just via a cup of tea, which would normally be about 3 or 4 cups a day. I've had clients, if you're in a warmer climate, who will do iced tea with it and throw like some frozen berries and stuff to flavor it. Otherwise, you can also get that in capsule form. That's amazing. It helps to ripen the cervix, and it's actually really nice in the postpartum period. I get my clients to stay on it for a further 2 weeks to help bring the uterus back to place. So
That's interesting. I haven't heard of that
yeah,
before.
yeah, I keep my ladies on it just to help with that recovery
Yeah.
process. And then, and I mean, if we think about it, because it's toning
Yeah.
your uterus and cervix, it makes sense, right?
Yeah.
And then the other thing, so castor oil, I did do that with 2 of my pregnancies, and I was due date babies for my boys. For my first 2, I went on my due date, and I did do the castor oil. The risk you run with castor oil, though, is that baby can do a poo while in utero, and I
Yeah.
was doing home births as well, so that is a risk you run. So I don't really recommend the castor oil. I do, however, like evening primrose oil as a pessary. So you insert it in your vagina as if you would a tampon, and that helps to release prostaglandins. And then the other thing is as well, just like, sex. Often women think or couples think it's the penetration of having
Yeah.
sexual intercourse, but it's actually the prostaglandins, within the male's sperm. So having sexual intercourse, a lot of women cannot be bothered by this point in their pregnancy, and that is totally understandable.
Or it's like, I'm done, have sex with me. I want this baby out. Kind of.
Yeah, you're either in 2 boats, like they can't
Yeah.
be bothered, I'll just wait it out, or this is
Do
business.
this. Yeah, exactly.
So that can also release the prostaglandins, which we need. Yeah, so mainly the raspberry leaf tea and then the evening primrose oil are my 2 go-tos there.
That's great. That's great information. Yeah. So once baby has arrived, what are some foods that you recommend for mums to have after they've given birth?
Looking at ideally like your slow cooked foods that are already broken down, and that's more just so that your body is going through healing. Obviously, you're also often trying to navigate breastfeeding, and again, even if it's your second or beyond baby, that can look completely different from baby to baby. So we're trying to navigate breastfeeding, we're trying to, whatever else going on, like we've got toddlers running around, whatever that looks like, and also that healing. So we're really wanting slow cooked kind of foods that are already broken down for you, and then focusing definitely on your iron. When it comes to assuming a mother's breastfeeding postpartum, we really want to bulk up that iron now. So it is no longer being depleted through, say, breast milk, for example. So your iron-rich foods are the one to really start to focus on. So if you haven't already added in like an organ meat supplement, definitely do that by postpartum. Your organ meat supplements are amazing because they've also got all the cofactor nutrients you need to uptake that iron. So they've got things like your B12, your folate, your vitamin A, your vitamin D. So they're really nice.
By organ
Yes,
meats, you mean like livers and stuff like that?
liver, liver, spleen. Yeah, particularly if you aren't a plant-based eater. They can also be in powders that you can add into, say, like your saucy kind of like spaghettis and things like that. Calories are really important. Eating a lot is important. If you're a breastfeeding woman, also just getting in things like, we do need energy. So sugars, you need at least 300 to 500 extra calories a day in your breastfeeding journey as well. Focusing on your calcium, again, assuming breastfeeding woman, it's wild, but a baby will actually, if you don't have enough calcium, which again, most women aren't hitting their needs pre-pregnancy, let alone pregnancy. We haven't really touched on this yet, but pregnancy, it's really important. And then postpartum, baby will literally suck it out of your bones and teeth if you don't have enough, which is wild. Like the amount of women that I see who, I actually had a client last week and she goes, oh my God, I stopped taking my calcium and my prenatal. And she goes, I've ended up with a cracked tooth, like her middle tooth cracked in her early days postpartum. All that teeth discoloration, like often that's due to low calcium levels. So that's a really important one as well. And then they're kind of the main, lots of warming foods, your herbs, your spices, cinnamon, that kind of stuff. As I mentioned, I still keep women on their raspberry leaf tea, even if that's in the form of a tea for that first couple of weeks. Your prenatal, I normally keep you on, especially if you're breastfeeding. Yeah, that's kind of where I go postpartum. And I normally say try to do, so when babies get in its 6-week checkup, try to do a blood test yourself at that appointment as well, just to check in on your basic nutrient levels, your liver, all of those kind of things as well. If gestational diabetes was a problem, looking at your blood sugars, that kind of stuff at that 6 week mark.
Yeah, definitely. They really do. I mean, they're beautiful little things at the end of the day, but they really do suck it all out of you, don't they?
Everything. And that's the
They
thing, like,
do.
yeah, what you do in pregnancy really does translate
Mm,
to your status in postpartum as well. I just think
mm,
it's, yeah, if you're depleted, they're taking it all from you in pregnancy. And then if you're breastfeeding, they're taking it all from you whilst breastfeeding. And if you're not replenishing those needs through pregnancy and or at least postpartum, if you're listening to this and you're already in those early postpartum stages, you can still replenish your needs.
yeah.
You just might need to have a little bit more focus on what supplements or, that you are taking. But yeah, they suck it all. So
Mm. You already mentioned a little bit about breastfeeding, but one main complaint to me about breastfeeding is that despite being like so difficult, you burn so many calories and all that stuff, is actually milk production. And what are some foods like can the
yeah.
teas and like the milk teas and the milk cookies actually help?
Yeah, for sure. So there's if we think about foods, like let's use gluten, not dairy, it would be lactose, but let's use gluten for an example. Like it is a component, I guess, within the food. So let's just think about that. So if we think about galactagogues, they're a component within a herbal food, and they have a ton of research on helping to increase milk supply. So common foods are generally like your oats, so oatmeal, your dark leafy greens, different nuts
Mm,
and seeds, especially something like your almonds, papaya, fenugreek. This is where we get more into your teas and supplements would be like your fenugreek, brewer's yeast, blessed thistle, and fennel. So they're kind of your main galactagogue rich
mm,
foods, which help increase your breast milk supply. So having something like oats for breakfast with almond butter mixed through it, a nice protein powder for your protein needs, or some Greek yogurt or something, and some papaya as your chopped fruit. Very galactagogue rich meal, not to mention nutrient dense. So not only are you going to be storing your nutrient needs, but you're also promoting your milk supply. So they're the foods that we want to get into. And most of your teas, as I said, have like the fenugreek, blessed thistle, and fennel. Brewer's yeast is often in the cookies. So often the cookies are brewer's yeast and oatmeal based. They also, like I love the Franjo's ones, they've got the coconut sugar in there. And even though there's quite a bit of sugar in it, it's still really nice because you need that sugar. We're talking about extra calories that are really important. And that's a big part of it. A lot of mums aren't actually eating enough to support their milk supply. And it's hard. Like it's so
mm,
hard. And unless you've got lots of family support or, a partner who's home. But even after like my partner was home, my husband was home for 2 weeks, once he went back to work, like even as a nutritionist, I found it so challenging sometimes to eat
it
my
is
meal. I still
hard.
do with three toddlers.
Yeah. Mm,
Like the amount of mornings that I just grab a coffee instead of food can't even count. Like within a week,
yes.
right? It's really hard. So I guess the more organized you can be, the better. Staying really hydrated is essential. Your carbohydrates and all of your macronutrients, your carbs, your proteins, and fats, really important. Fat's the most calorie dense. So again, if we're going back to calories, although I'd never recommend tracking, but naturally you can kind of work out if you're getting enough
Yeah.
food or not. And if you're eating less than what you did pre-pregnancy, then that's probably a really good understanding as to you not eating enough.
Mm,
But yeah, so all the teas and things really do work. I also say to mums, like, trying to carve out your self-care time is really important. So a lot of
yeah.
women's breast milk is dropping in the afternoon. So at that point, and I always did this, I'd go and have an Epsom salt bath and I would sit there and I'd have a cup of tea, like a breastfeeding tea, and I'd just chill out for a while. And then I'd get my husband to bring my baby up to me and I'd feed whilst in the bath, like once the
Oh,
bath had
yeah.
gone to a nicer temperature, because not only are you getting that skin on skin, so that oxytocin release, which is going to help your milk supply, but that steam from the hot bath has also helped stimulate your milk supply as well. But if you know that by afternoon your milk supply is starting to drop, that's when you really want to carve out your, like, in air quotes, me time.
Yeah.
So whether that be getting someone to come and help you at that time, or your husband being home at like 5 o'clock so that you can go and just like have your cup of tea, have something to eat. I used to also watch something trashy that I could switch my brain off. just to like
I love
rejuvenate a
it.
little bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm like gossip girl all the way. But it was like really essential for me just to like de-stress, because as mothers, we hear our baby cry and we are just throwing in fight or
Yeah.
flight all day long. Like, and it is something that never goes away. Like my eldest is almost 5. So at the moment I have a 4, a 3, and an almost 2-year-old actually. And like the amount of times I am just in fight or flight all day long, you know what I
Mm,
mean? And so that's the
mm.
same with like a newborn.
Holding your baby, putting them in a sling and like walking around with them, having them on you all the time does help with the breast milk production. It increases the oxytocin, like you said, and it does give you the time to do the laundry and have your baby there. And I touch on it a little bit in some other episodes, but the theory that your baby, you can't let them like get too close to you because they'll be like attached to you forever, that's like totally backwards. Like if you have them always on you, always with you, always next to you, like that actually helps them develop better later on in life. Yeah, so don't be afraid to hold your baby, because if you are having your baby always with you, always next to you, they've just been inside of you for 9 months. They will want to be with you, on you, and next to you all the time. And it really helps them get that sense of security. So later on, they are actually more independent. They're not hanging on you all the time like the little monkey on your ankle or whatever. So yeah, don't be afraid to have your baby with you. It will help them develop much, much better later on in life, and yeah, really help them. So are there any like golden nuggets before we wrap this up that you have for mums that they absolutely just need to know?
Golden nuggets. Look, I think just, we touched on nervous system just before, and that is the biggest thing, like support your nervous system.
Yeah.
Do stuff that is going to make you happy as well, because at the end of the day, you are the main domino. And if you fall down, the rest of your little family and everything else kind of starts collapsing around you as well. And I've learned that the hard way. And so, I've hit burnout quite a lot in my mother journey. And I'm like, as soon as I take a step back, I'm like, oh, I haven't done anything for myself and so it doesn't matter whether you've got one or more children. I think you just really need to nourish yourself, find support where possible, but definitely just make sure you're getting out. And ideally, if you've got a little bit of a supportive community or at least a partner, you can step out. If it's 10 minutes, it doesn't matter. Just really try to nourish yourself, whether you are in pregnancy, early days, postpartum, or into your motherhood journey. Like it is key.
If you don't have that support, don't worry. If your family is in another country, like mine is, hire a doula. They are worth the cost. And if you are having trouble sleeping, you're not getting enough sleep, hire a nighttime doula. They are, once again, worth the cost. And yeah, you are recovering too. And this is important for later on. Shelley, it's been wonderful to talk to you today. I've learned so much, and there's so much wonderful information that we talked about. There's some really scary information out there, so it's really important to put the real stuff out there. And yeah, especially when you're growing another human inside you, it can be really scary knowing what to do, what's right. So thanks for coming on to talk to me today.
Thank you so much. It was so nice to come on.
Do you want to tell the listeners where to find you, your Instagram, your website, your podcast?
Yeah, sure. So website, freedomwellness.com.au. You will be able to find all the links there. But on Instagram, I'm most active, Shelley McKenzie, MCK_naturopath. And yeah, the podcast is the No BS Approach to Motherhood, where I co-host that with another nutritionist, and we dive into all of this good stuff as well. And I've also got programs all around pregnancy nutrition and baby nutrition too. So you can find all that on my website as well.
Amazing. I'll put those links in the description. If you're enjoying the podcast, make sure you give us a follow and rate the show. And if you know who's someone who you think needs to listen to this episode, give it a share so we can spread the word and educate more mamas and women worldwide. And we'll see you next Monday for another juicy episode. For more information on pregnancy, birth, and parenthood, head over to my website or Instagram at blissfulbirth.co. And just a little reminder, the information contained in this podcast is here to educate and empower, and does not replace the advice of your own healthcare provider.